In which case, I would have to, that's also, something. But, it's also, I definitely
Makes it a little bit harder for work wonderfully insightful.
So Mike's going to be appearing up there. Yeah, so we're testing that out, seeing if that's a better solution than this. We were supposed to have counsel, so.
I think it'd be easier for the cameras.
Yep, that's what I thought too.
Because it's over here, and it's kind of at a weird angle.
All right, how's it? I just want to check the cameras and the sound. Is it working out? Good. Any issues? All right, last check. All right, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Cody Bowman, and I provide communications for Mayor Ted Wheeler. We are excited for all of you to join us here today as we announce a new emergency declaration centered around gun violence. We're also outlining the mayor's plans for the Safer Summer PDX initiative. We have a really good lineup today. We have the mayor who will be kicking things off. We have Mike Myers, who is the director of the Community Safety Division. He'll be attending virtually, so we'll have him up here, something new that we're going to try. Everyone else will be appearing here in person. So after Director Myers, we'll have Sierra Ellis from the Office of Violence Prevention. We'll have Candell Ashley from the Safer Summer PDX initiative. We'll have Chief Lavelle from the Portland Police Bureau. And then we will follow up with a Q&A. So hold all your questions until the end. It looks like we've got quite a few members of the press here, so we'll probably limit your questions to one. So just keep that in mind. And with that, if we're all set to go, I will introduce Mayor Ted Wheeler.
Good afternoon. Until Portland's gun murders stop, we won't stop. We won't stop until we get justice for more gun violence victims and their families. And we won't stop until we bring peace back to those Portland neighborhoods that are too often caught in the crossfire. Today, I'm presenting a 2-year evidence-based plan called Safer Summer PDX. This plan is specific, and it provides actionable goals to better coordinate existing resources and activates an additional $2.4 million to near-term community-based violence interventions. Safer Summer PDX is accompanied by an emergency declaration that will implement the plan in an agile, accountable, coordinated, and fair manner, reducing Portland's gun violence by at least 10% over the next 2 years. Safer Summer PDX focuses on providing positive options for those who are now engaged in gun violence and creates options for them to step away from a life of violence. It complements the law enforcement gun violence improvements that are already in place and already showing positive results. In 2020, Chief Lavelle and I led efforts to create the Enhanced Community Safety Team, known as the ECST, within the Portland Police Bureau. In this calendar year alone, the ECST has been assigned over 250 cases related to gun violence and continues to work diligently to bring perpetrators to justice. In 2021, I directed the creation of the Focused Intervention Team, known as the FIT, which includes a strong community oversight group. That's called the FIT COG, the FIT Community Oversight Group. They conduct weekly meetings to review ongoing FIT actions to ensure that the team operates in a manner that's consistent with community values. This year, the FIT has recovered dozens of guns and made over 100 arrests. In 2021, Portland also expanded its partnership with the Portland Area Crime Gun Initiative convened by the United States Attorney. It brings all levels of law enforcement together to address gun violence here in the city of Portland. This initiative reviews gun violence crimes with an eye towards federal prosecutions as appropriate and makes referrals to provide services for high-risk individuals. We are continuing our recruitment efforts to hire more police officers and unarmed public safety support specialists. While we still have a ways to go in achieving my goal of hiring an additional 300 Police Bureau staff in the next 3 years, I'm proud to say we're making good progress. This morning, 23 new staff were sworn in, including public safety specialists, support staff, and 16 new sworn officers. As we increase staffing and collaboration amongst law enforcement, the ability to constitutionally investigate, arrest, and prosecute those who murder or attempt to murder others with a gun also increases. But Portland will not cure our gun violence problem through law enforcement and prosecutions alone. We understand that it takes law enforcement and criminal justice agencies combined with community-focused violence intervention efforts to bring peace back to the streets of Portland. That's why in 2021, City Council expanded other programs like the Park Ranger Team to better ensure the safety in public spaces. In addition, Council allocated a total over $10 million over the next 2 years to increase community-based violence prevention programs through the Office of Violence Prevention, usually known as OVP. And that's why just last month, we brought the city's crime prevention program and OVP into the Community Safety Division to better strengthen coordination amongst all of our community safety initiatives. Each of these efforts are extremely important elements to addressing this deadly issue. And yet, despite these and other community safety improvements, gun violence in Portland continues to increase. To improve our results, we needed a deeper understanding of the exact nature and the drivers of Portland's gun violence. That's why I commissioned the California Partnership for Safe Communities, an independent expert group to analyze the exact nature of gun violence in our community. That data allows us to more precisely guide our actions and our investments to better achieve quicker and better results. Last week, California Partnership for Safe Communities finalized their problem analysis report on Portland's gun violence. The research findings are sobering, but it provides us with the actionable insight that we need to tweak and change and create better solutions moving forward. The report highlighted 4 specific aspects of Portland's gun problem. First, just over half the gun violence that we see in our community is group member involved. The data estimates that a little over 200 individuals are responsible for the vast majority of our city's gun violence. 200 individuals. Second, the largest age group involved with gun crimes is between 25 to 34 years of age. Third, although African American males make up 5.9% of Portland's population, they comprise 47% of shooting victims and suspects. And fourth, starting from our low baseline of gun violence, Portland's rate of gun violence has increased faster than many of our peer cities, 207% since 2019. Our 2-year plan, Safer Summer PDX, along with its partnering emergency declaration, which is designed to fast-track plan implementation across all of our city bureaus, is built on these new research findings. Emergency declarations can get results that the status quo just can't. It organizes the work needed within a unified command structure and provides the agility and the ability to address gun violence in our community. It really boils down to this. The Safer Summer PDX plan is the start of a 2-year plan to reduce gun murders by at least 10% over the next 2 years by increasing effective community-based violence interventions. First, based on the data that we now have, we know that almost 200 people are actively involved in local gun violence in Portland. We're going to fund community-based messengers, outreach workers who are not connected to law enforcement or criminal justice programs, to reach out to the small number of Portlanders most at risk of being involved in gun violence in our community. Rather than arrest and prosecute, our goal with this program will be to offer each person at risk of gun violence a meaningful and workable plan tailored to each person's specific needs to prevent them from getting involved with this in the first place. For those already engaged in gun violence, we will provide all that we can to help them decide to stop and leave that life behind. Second, we will be expanding place-based intervention in neighborhoods that are caught in the crossfire of gun violence. Like the pilot effort led by Commissioner Hardesty near Mount Scott, these efforts will work with communities to identify environmental changes that interrupt gun violence. These interventions could include increased lighting, traffic diversion, or the use of non-law enforcement personnel to maintain positive environments in the public spaces. Third, there are a number of gun violence and criminal hotspots that will require us to use all our tools, including law enforcement and community-based interventions, to restore peace, like the situation that you read about in last Sunday's Oregonian along 82nd Avenue. Fourth, and this is very important, as we do this community violence intervention work, we need to do it effectively, consistently, and fairly. And that's why I've embedded the involvement of a city attorney in the inner workings of this plan and its accompanying emergency declaration. City Attorney Tony Garcia, who does not provide legal advice to the Police Bureau, will serve as the legal review counsel. In this role, he will watch over all of our shoulders, asking tough questions, playing the contrarian, and advising the team to make sure that we protect the legal rights of clients we reach out to with community-based nonprofit partners. We will continue to be persistent, agile, and responsive in our efforts and our investments. As we learn more about this issue, and as this issue continues to evolve, we will adapt and assess all potential paths forward. The public's expectations are clear, and we've set our goals accordingly. We will not stop until gun violence stops. Before I turn this over to Director Mike Myers, who hopefully will show up there, I want to speak directly to those who are involved in gun violence within our city and to those who might know others who are involved with it. My message to you is this: we do not choose the lives that we are born into. I know that many of you have been dealt an incredible, challenging hand in life, whether that's due to your family situation, the discrimination that you face on a daily basis, or simple mistakes that put you on a rocky path. I'm here to tell you that we are sincere in wanting to offer you a path out. We want to provide you with the tools, the resources, and the support needed to lead a better, safer life for you, and importantly, for your loved ones. We will be seeking to connect with our community-based outreach workers who, in turn, will be attempting to reach out to you. We'll also be establishing a hotline where you can confidentially reach out to us. With that, I'll turn it over to Director Myers, who I have appointed as the incident commander on this emergency declaration and the leader of the Safe Summer PDX initiative, to walk through how the action plan is organized. And if all things work well, Mike will show up. There he is, right on cue. Thanks, Mike.
Well, thank you, Mayor Wheeler, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Myers. I'm the Community Safety Transition Director for the City of Portland, and I will be your incident commander for this emergency. The mayor just explained what we are doing and why we are doing this, and I will now explain how we plan on operationalizing this emergency declaration. The mayor's office recently released the California Partnership for Safer Communities report. The Portland Homicide Problem Analysis 2019-2020 report highlighted the specific groups within our community who who are at greatest risk of violence. With this knowledge, we can tailor interventions to reduce community risk. In addition to helping us identify people at highest risk for gun violence, the gun violence data helps us focus on locations in the city that are most impacted by that gun violence. The report also identified groups and networks at high risk for involvement in violence and their relationships to certain locations in Portland. Using an incident command structure, we will coordinate multiple city and regional partners into a common focus to reduce the gun violence in Portland. This will include the focused intervention team's work around violent offenders. Following each shooting review, the team will develop a plan of action to refer those associated with the violent event who cannot be arrested to community-led outreach teams to lower the chances of retaliation, thus breaking the cycle of harm. Plan development will have community oversight by the community oversight group that was established last year. And as the mayor mentioned, we'll have a dedicated legal review council to ensure that practices are complying with legal requirements. The Office of Violence Prevention, led by Director Nike Green, will work with non-law enforcement partners to provide critical outreach to those at high risk of gun violence. As part of the broad collection of violence reduction strategies we have planned for this emergency, there's a strong desire to invest in vulnerable neighborhoods that are being impacted by this gun violence. Using multiple analytic tools and spatial analysis, our researchers have been able to identify where this violence is occurring and where place-based investments should be made. The mayor's office recently allocated $2.4 million to this effort and identified Sharif Khatib with the Community Safety Division to lead the investment strategy. Sharif and his team will work with community organizations in these neighborhoods to identify rapid interventions and will coordinate between those groups and city bureaus to bring much needed community-driven improvements and interventions to gun violence impacted areas. The Office of Violence Prevention will also be focusing community outreach in those same designated areas. Together, we believe these investments can have positive results by increasing community vibrancy and lower gun-related crime. And finally, as you know, the mayor declared an emergency around houselessness approximately 3 months ago. Referencing the California Partnership Safer Communities report, and the 2019 report is stronger on this point. It is clear our houseless community is highly impacted by gun violence. We must continue to work to reduce gun-related crime within our houseless communities and continue to provide safer and healthier options for shelter. We've already begun this work with the establishment of the Street Services Coordination Center, led by Nate Takara. Nate and his team have been working diligently to increase sheltering options for houseless individuals in Portland, working directly in the streets to navigate individuals from our sidewalks to shelters and providing safer and healthier option for houseless than living on our streets. We have concentrated our work in Old Town and Downtown. The efforts of this team have already achieved positive impacts in those areas. Collectively, under an incident command structure and by bringing a wide range of violence reduction strategies to bear, we believe we can reduce gun violence in Portland, and we are committed to do so. Thank you. I think I'll turn it over to Sierra Ellis with the Office of Violence Prevention.
Good afternoon. My name is Sierra Ellis, and I'm the Operations Manager for the Office of Violence Prevention. I am here on behalf of my office and Director Nike Green. Thank you to the Mayor and his team for the invitation to speak on behalf of OVP's ongoing efforts in addressing gun violence in our city. As you all know, Portland has experienced increase in gun violence over the last several years. The Gun Violence Reduction Ordinance was a great first initial investment council made for communities that have been directly impacted by gun violence. Through the ordinance, OVP has been able to expand our services and resources to support these individuals and families. To expand and support community efforts, OVP was able to provide 5 new organizations with community grants. OVP will continue to focus on supporting community-based organizations and individuals in their efforts to address the violence we are experiencing today. For an example, the Healing Hurt People PDX and Trauma Violence Impacted Family Program, the families and individuals who have been recently impacted by gun violence are connected to various services and resources that range from therapy, relocation assistance, funeral support, and much more. As I stated earlier, to address the issue we are seeing today, there needs to be an all-hands-on-deck approach and requires deep and sustainable investments. Gun violence is a complex issue that spans across jurisdictions. Gun violence knows no boundaries, and we will see the need for commitment, coordination, collaboration, and investments in funding services and advocacy across all jurisdictions and levels. That is why I am eager to work alongside all summer initiatives and partners to reduce violence in our city. Thank you for your time, and I will pass it over to my colleague, Candell Ashley.
Good afternoon. My name is Candell Ashley. I've had the pleasure of working with constituents in the mayor's office for the past year. I recently joined the Safer Summer PDX initiative as a project manager associate. I was born and raised in Portland. I have seen the good and the bad that this city has to offer. I have lived experience in the realm of gun violence. Shootings and homicides have greatly impacted myself, those around me, and my community. I am joined with my colleague, Sharif, who brings over a decade of experience working in counter-violence operations all over the world. Together, our team has a combined experience of global and local expertise to help address gun violence here in Portland. Our team will work with community members that are most impacted by gun violence to help break this cycle. Our work alongside OVP's efforts, Safe Summer PDX efforts, focus on places and groups and communities most affected by gun violence. We are using a combination of methods to engage with those most likely to engage or become victims, those who are vulnerable and likely to be pulled into, which we call on the fence, and to break these cycles. Our three objectives of the summer efforts are to engage and persuade those most likely to shoot not to shoot, engage those on the fences to participate in social activities to keep them off the streets and to keep them from roaming or interacting with these people that are shooting. And then invest in neighborhoods and communities that are most impacted by gun violence. As our team works to help address this gun violence, our partners have been on the streets where the violence is happening to combat this. I believe, just like my colleague has said, this is an all-hands-on-deck situation. We need to work together to make sure that we're complementing the work of other community-based organizations, city-led initiatives, and public safety works. I believe this approach is the correct approach, and we're on the right track. The time is now. The time is now for our elders and religious leaders to come back and say and speak. The time is now for our parents to get a hold of our kids. The time is now for us to rebuild our community and rejuvenate the soul that we have now lost. The time is now. Thank you, and I give it over to Chief LaBelle.
Good afternoon. I want to thank Mayor Wheeler for bringing us all here together to talk about the violence in our community and the trauma that we're seeing on our streets. This violence is heartbreaking for all of us who love our city. To the families and loved ones of victims, I want to express my sympathies and assure you that our investigators are working as hard as they can. First, I want to discuss the Police Bureau and our ongoing efforts to address gun violence. As you know, our Focus Intervention Team, or FIT, started in January of this year, and we now have a fully functioning oversight body, the FIT-COG. FIT is made up of 12 officers and 2 sergeants, and since January 19th of 2022, they have recovered 40 guns and made 104 arrests. I also want to give a lot of credit to our patrol officers. They've recovered guns and continue to make some excellent arrests of violent offenders, including felons in possession of firearms. Our East Patrol officers have been doing some directed stolen car missions. We know there is often a criminal nexus with stolen cars and illegal firearms, and their missions have been very valuable. They did one with our partners in Gresham last week, and another this week, where they made some great arrests. On the investigation side, our Enhanced Community Safety Team, or ECST, works to investigate shooting cases in the hopes of stopping retaliatory violence and holding those responsible accountable. ECST has been assigned 263 cases. They have cleared 70 of those, suspended 115, and remain working 78 open investigations. In May, I made the decision to add investigators to our homicide detail. We added detectives and a sergeant in order to have 3 teams to focus on our current homicides. I often discuss our critical staffing shortage, and we remain at the lowest levels that anyone has seen in the last 2 to 3 decades. However, as the mayor mentioned, today we hired 16 police officers and 1 public safety support specialist. This is the largest new hire event we've had in a very, very long time. Before 2020, our goal had been roughly about 10 a month, and we hope to stick to that goal. We're finding there are a lot of new applicants as well as lateral officers that want to come join the police bureau. We've worked hard to make our hiring process as efficient as possible. We rehired background investigators, and our recruiters have been doing great work. We're looking at the next few months as also being very productive for hiring. Though it takes roughly 18 months before a new officer will be on the street and fully functioning, it still gives us hope that we can rebuild and continue to reshape our innovative agency. Today's a reminder that it's going to take more than law enforcement to address and reduce this surge in gun violence. We value these partnerships and continue to improve our communications to have a focused approach. We continue to meet with our various partners. This week we had discussions with Office of Violence Prevention and the Department of Community Justice on other ways we can direct our efforts. We need this important coordination with other city bureaus, our partners, and community-based organizations to reduce gun violence and ensure people feel safe living and working in our beautiful city. And with that, I think we'll do the Q&A part. Sure.
All right, we're going to move on to the Q&A portion. I'm going to invite all the speakers up here together. So if we can have the OVP and Stephanie. We're going to include Stephanie Howard here, who directs community safety for the mayor's office. She'll be available for questions. We'll bring Mike back up on the screen, or Director Myers, excuse me. Hopefully he can get back up there. And let's see, we'll have Kendall and Sharif as well from Safer Summer PDX. Perfect. And then let's start on this side. I'm going to just have you raise your hand. Because of the volume of folks that we have in this room, we're going to stick to 1 question for each outlet or each reporter here. So raise your hand and then let us know who you'd like to speak to, and we will go around. So is there somebody over here? Start with Liz. She's ready.
Yeah, sure. Liz Birch from 46 News. Questions for Mayor Wheeler. This question actually comes from homicide victims. I talked to 2 today. One told me she feels like there's a sense of lawlessness. She wants to know what you're doing to make sure the community knows that you're working for them on this issue. The other homicide victims family member wanted to know what's being done to really focus on all the unsolved murders right now. So my question for you, Mr. Mayor, is what do you want to say to these homicide victims family members who are demanding answers?
Well, first of all, it goes without saying that I want to express my condolences. And I also know that there's nothing that I can possibly say to address the level of hurt and trauma that they're experiencing. I feel very badly for them, and I'm sorry for them, and they're in my thoughts. But that's not enough. And your question really gets to, is the city lawless, and what are we doing about it? And I think the best way I can honor those families and their trauma is through actionable, definable steps that we can take to reduce the violence and then show positive, measurable results on the other side. That's how we honor them, by changing the status quo. I don't want to go back through what I'm doing except to say that we're increasing the law enforcement components through more officers, through the enhanced community safety team, which gets at your question about what are we doing around investigations. We have significantly increased our investigative capacity through the enhanced community safety team. We have specifically focused on gun violence on the law enforcement side through the focused intervention team and the community oversight group, the FITCOG. We have strengthened our partnerships with our federal partners to make sure that we have a sharing of information and a collaboration of investigative capacity and, when appropriate, federal prosecutions. Along with my colleagues on the City Council, we've made longer-term upstream investments through the Office of Violence Prevention to get at the triggers that can lead somebody to either be involved in gun violence or impacted by gun violence. And this new program today, along with its accompanying executive directive, is a natural evolution of that process to the next phase, to bring everybody together under a unified command, to use the data that we have just collected through the California partnerships that now gives us a clearer picture of the violence on our street, how it's happening, where it's happening, who is engaged in and impacted by it. And these are the kinds of things that we're going to continue to do going forward to address this. I think the chief probably has something he'd like to add to that, but what I want the families to know is we have not forgotten them, and we will not forget them.
Thank you, Mayor. I echo the mayor's sentiments there. It's so hard to even express, our condolences to a family who just lost a loved one. It doesn't bring their loved one back, and I don't know if it gives them much solace, but I do want people to know, and families of victims in particular, that we're working as hard as we can to solve these cases. We've dedicated a lot of investigative resources that have impacted other things, frankly, in the city, like property crime and even cold case, to increase our ability to investigate these homicides and shootings. And that's our charge. That will always be our charge, is to find justice and to work with these families to make sure that not only they get their justice, but maybe the next family doesn't have to experience the hurt that we see when we work with families every day.
Mayor Wheeler, in mind that this data reflects that most of the victims and suspects are young men aged 25 to 34 years old, what are specific parts of your plan to look at?
I'd like to turn this over to Stephanie to talk more specifically. She's my public safety expert. But the focus here, even though I've made a personal plea to people to reach out to us, and I've let people know we will attempt to reach out to them, and we hope they will listen, we need credible messengers, and that's a part of this plan, and Stephanie can talk a little bit about that.
Sure, thank you for the question. I think there are several different approaches that will be taken through this effort, but the key to them is to finding what is meaningful to these people individually, focusing on what their needs are, whether that's help getting employment, whether that's relocation fees, whether that's life coaching, whether that's educational opportunities. The goal here is to identify the needs of these individuals through this outreach and to try to find ways that the city can help to support them and move them out of this life.
And Stephanie, if you could also just elaborate on the individuals that will be doing the outreach are people that they are likely to listen to.
Yep.
Because they already have developed trust.
Sure. Yeah, the mayor mentioned credible messengers and the importance of that. And I think if anyone were to conduct research on what viable outreach to people who we're trying to convince to come out of this life looks like, what you will see over and over is the importance of having the outreach performed by someone who understands that life, generally someone who has gotten themselves out of it. And so what we are looking for are opportunities and partnerships where we can find those people to connect them and help to persuade these folks to change.
Mike, did you have anything to add to that?
No, Mayor, I think Stephanie just gave a good presentation of what we're trying to do. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike.
All right, move on to another question. Go ahead.
Hi, Mayor Wheeler, Evan Watson, KDW. The California Partnership Study showed how homicides and shootings more than doubled between 2019 and 2021. And this plan, as you laid out today, lists a 10% reduction in homicides and shootings year to year as a target goal. Why is that a lofty enough goal for the city to set, knowing the big spike we've seen recently?
Yeah, thank you for that. And that number generated a lot of discussion internally as well. We obviously hope to do much, much better than that. but it's also a statement of acknowledgement that there are many factors that come into play. It's a complex issue, and it's going to take time and energy, particularly if you're talking about one-on-one interventions with that group of individuals who are likely to be engaged in or impacted by gun violence. So I see that as a floor, as a baseline.
My question is somewhat of a step back. Much of this outreach work, hasn't that been ongoing over the past few years? So how is this, and there's been the Healing Hurt People has been in the hospitals, gang outreach workers on the streets. So what is going to be different with this approach? What's going to be new? And is there much collaboration between the police who are out there and the community-based groups that are working to do outreach?
Yeah, I think, there are several things that are different about this. Number one, this is an addition to the work that's already happening. The emergency declaration provides us with the ability to expedite the way that we target resources and to respond to individual needs like I outlined before as we get that outreach completed. So I think that the biggest part of what's different is our agility through the emergency declaration to identify and respond to the needs as we learn them. I would also say that working and building on the work of OVP through some of the interventions that you referenced, we're looking at additional partners. The emergency declaration provides us, and the $2.4 million that council allocated to this, provides us with additional resources to find more ways to outreach, to find more relevant and meaningful ways to conduct that outreach faster. So I think that's one of the biggest things that is different now. It's a building on to that and the agility that it provides.
And if I could I also just add to that?
I also just wondered how will you identify where that money will go?
Great, I'll let you deal with that one in a minute, or somebody else can deal with the money question. So first of all, yes, many of these trusted community partners are in the community already. What's different is now they're under a unified command structure. So we had individuals through the Office of Community and Civic Life. We had the Office of Violence Prevention. The county has its parole and probation officers and the referral services there. Now we're bringing all of these services together on a unified basis so that they can make quick decisions, they can be agile in that decision making, and they can measure their collective results. And if they need to true up or tweak the plan or move into a slightly different direction, they're all sitting around the same table at the same time making that decision collectively.
And I think perhaps Sharif would be good to respond to how we identify those opportunities.
Yeah, and she had a question about budget as well, dollars.
How will the $2.4 million be allocated? How will you decide where that money?
Yeah, you can hear me through the mask, I hope.
Yes.
Great. So the organizations that we're working with will be identified a number of ways, either through applications to us, through a very simple set of questions, which has done a broad round robin through emails, or through our direct outreach to organizations in our geographic areas of focus that we believe are representative of those communities and can reach the people who need that assistance most. And following on from what Stephanie said, the advantage of the emergency declaration compared to what our colleagues in OVP are doing who have run a formal grants process, this allows us to expedite the awards process so we can award to much smaller groups who perhaps don't have the capacity to write a full formal grant application. So we're adapting to their needs much more specifically. In terms of financial allocation, it's I don't want to say a fairly even split, but broadly between our three objectives of focus, between focusing on the individuals who are most likely to be affected or perpetuate gun violence and persuading them to not do so, engaging youth in pro-social activities, and then through the place-based investments.
Max, did you get the copy of the? Yeah, there's actually a section in there, but it's like halfway through, but it is there.
Will the funding be ongoing? I know that's been some of the concerns of the smaller groups that get initial funding, but
That's my job.
After you, sir.
Look, as long as this crisis exists, there will be funding, and I will continue to fight for it, and I believe the majority of my council will continue to support it.
John Munson,
Hey, Jonathan.
Mr. Mayor, we first did how complex gun violence is. Similarly, counterinsurgency is hanging together. What is it about foreign development in Afghanistan and Iraq? Second question, are you all concerned that programs Mr. Kotzik helped manage were found to be hugely wasteful?
Two loaded questions in a row. Well done. First of all, Sharif brings global experience in violence prevention. And he's being teamed up with Kendall and Julian, who were born and raised here. At least they're I don't know if you were both born and raised here, but you are both born and raised here. So they understand the local dynamics of the community, and I can let them speak for themselves. But I think as a combination, it brings both global best practices as well as local knowledge to the table in a way that I expect to be very effective.
I'm sorry, I mean, Mr. Kotzik, what are some specifics of that global best practices?
The name's pronounced Khatib. That's all right. So I have about 15 years of experience implementing US government-funded programs addressing counter-violence and counter-terrorism in some of the most dynamic and challenging environments. And in all of the programs I've managed, we have worked with community as the building block for resilience and resistance to those challenges. And the effects are surprisingly similar, regardless of the country in which you work, because in all communities there is resilience, there is pride, there is strength, but there is also a very weighted history. And it's balancing those two things. I would argue that my foreign experience, and as you can tell, I'm not entirely American, allows me to not accept that facts are given or real. I do not consider it acceptable that 5.9% of the population is Black American in Portland, yet a disproportionately high volume is affected by gun violence. I do not accept where the communities are located or where the interstates are located. All of these factors I consider as an element to challenge, to consider in our approaches, and to ensure that all the resources we are putting into communities are there for the communities to use for their resilience and their continued strength. And I would like to challenge you and ask you to do further homework, please, on entirely wasteful previous programs. That is factually incorrect. Thank you.
Eric Mock, K2. So this is for Mayor Wheeler and others who need to address this, but we've been talking with people all week around these neighborhoods, that mostly these hotspots, you see how they connect in the report, right? And they've told us they feel like not enough is being done. So can you kind of tell them concretely, what are they going to see moving forward this declaration that's going to look different to them? Because they say they're just not seeing enough being done right now.
Yeah, well, what you're going to see is all of the interventions and prevention strategies that are identified in the report are going to be targeted in areas with the highest need and towards individuals who are the most likely to be engaged in or impacted by gun violence. So it is intended to be a targeted, focused approach. And we believe that will have the most significant impact. The analogy is often given with regard to gun violence that it is like a virus. And if it is like a virus and you know that there is a cure for said virus, then you obviously want to connect the cure to those who are exposed to the virus. And given that all of the factual data suggests that gun violence is like a virus and it spreads like a virus, using that same model makes a ton of sense. And so that's what we're attempting to do here.
So are they going to see more, in these neighborhoods, right, where we see shooting after shooting, are they going to see more community programs?
Yes. Yeah, part of this is working alongside, as I mentioned, some of the environmental factors that can lead to increased gun violence. And we're going to let the community lead us to some of those interventions. If there's a particular park, and I'm making this up, but there might be a particular park that requires more of an intervention from our rangers, or maybe improved lighting, or Other types of environmental issues could be addressed. If there are individuals in a particular area where we have a high volume of gun incidents, we may see an increased presence of OVP and some of our other intervention specialists and community organizations working in that neighborhood and meeting with people in that neighborhood and reaching out to people in that neighborhood. Some of it will be visible, some of it will not be. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what we will be judged by in those neighborhoods is, do they see a decrease in gun violence? If they do, they'll know the program's working. If they don't, they'll know it isn't. And they'll hold us accountable for it. I guarantee you that. Thank you. That's a great question, Alex. The short answer is yes and yes. I will always reserve the right to use the authority of the mayor that's granted in the charter to issue executive directives. The reason I've used them is because they work. I'll give you a different situation. It was a few months ago that we created the Street Services Coordination Center around housing. Our problematic campsite removal increased by 342.857% year over year in May and 714.706% year over year in June. So they work. That's the first thing. The second thing that they do is they put an otherwise fragmented structure under a unified command. And as I mentioned, just even the most basic elements of our community outreach were in 3 different bureaus in the city of Portland, plus we have other community-based partners and other governments like the parole and probation folks at Multnomah County who are potentially involved on a referral basis as well. And we have the ability to get immediate results. If we're going to work with all of these different bureaus, it can take months and months and months and months to align leadership, the bureau directors, the city council, have the work session, have the first reading, have the second reading, assuming it even gets that far. But we are in a gun violence crisis, and some of the data that we put out there in the beginning of this presentation clearly underscores that. And so I felt the need to act with urgency and create an agile and responsive structure to what we're doing here. I'm not sure that if we were under a different form of government, I would do this any differently. I think it's my responsibility as mayor to try and bring together these different resources in a way that makes good sense. And I believe this is the best way to do it. Okay. So I can't be specific on the second part today. We definitely increased funding for recruiting and retention during this last budget cycle in the Portland Police Bureau. I have pledged here in Portland that over 3 years we will seek 300 additional first responders. That can be police officers, that can be unarmed public safety support specialists and others. But it is definitely my thinking that the Portland Police Bureau is critically understaffed and that we need more officers, and that will require additional funding. So the answer is yes. I just can't be specific about how much at this particular point. But that will be definitely debated during our next budget process, which literally has just kicked off and will reach fruition next June. I do. I think that public sentiment has changed. I think there is an acknowledgement that good policing does not necessarily equal less or no policing. Good policing still requires law enforcement professionals, but how they do their job also matters to us. So that means they have to be transparent, they have to be accountable as much as possible. The makeup of the police bureau should reflect the community that it serves. And as the chief indicated with the new hire ceremony this morning, I think we're making good progress. And the chief didn't mention it, but I might go ahead and just do it. The recruits seem to be very diverse, which to me is hugely important. I'm excited to see that. The efforts that the Bureau is making to reach out to different communities seem to be paying off. Now, one successful recruiting or one successful hiring session doesn't a trend make, but it gives me a lot of hope for the future. Thank you. Chief, did you want to chime in on that one? You are the chief after all.
Well, I never pass up an opportunity to recruit. And we are recruiting. It's one of our high priorities is to bring the staffing level at the Police Bureau back up. We've lost some really important units and some work that really needs to be done in the city. Our traffic unit was moved to assist patrol to answer calls for service. Folks from our narcotics unit were moved to answer calls for service and help the precincts. And you look at this, we're a city that's had a lot of crashes, a lot of fatalities on our roads. Restoring our traffic division is a high priority for me, but we need the staffing to do that. You look at the effects of overdoses and fentanyl on our community, and we want to have folks in place to do that. And also answer calls for service, but on the backs of all these calls for service are investigations too. We need investigative bodies, detectives. We move people from cold case and property crimes to focus on just this huge rise in gun violence, but that's important work too that needs to get done as well. So we're always looking to hire new people that want to come in and have a heart for service and want to serve the city. Portland's a great place to come do it. Lateral officers and other places that are looking for another opportunity, we're happy to welcome them as well. But I think for us to really do the things that we need to do as a police bureau and give the service that we want to give to our community, we're going to need the proper staffing to do it.
Go ahead.
I think the determination of how long the emergency declaration lasts will be determined by what our gun violence looks like. This was a 2-year plan. Hopefully we won't need an emergency declaration for 2 years around this, but we're committed to doing whatever we need to do to address it as quickly as we can.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming. We really appreciate it. You guys have my contact info if you have any follow-up questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And did everybody get the report? Y'all got the report? Okay.
Report's out there. If you didn't get it, let me know.